Hey there, my friends. My name is Carpo, or Joshua, or some strange guy on the internet talking about stuff, whichever you prefer. Hope everyone's doing well today, and I'd like to talk a little bit about why we're in the situation we're in regarding our rights, corruption, and politics, uh, the police state, and I've talked about these things in the past. I'm not going to try to go too much into detail, but I probably will. It seems imperative that we do. And when I was growing up, I had issues with police. Of course, many kids do. I was a little punk. I had a mullet. I skated around town and was kicked out of areas for skateboarding, but I generally didn't cause a lot of trouble. Um, it depends on what you consider trouble. But I quickly became aware of the drug laws after being harassed for cannabis and being arrested at 18 for growing and having a felony on my record at a young age. Even though I was a pretty well-mannered kid, I meant well, intended for a great future. And of course, the felony only held me back so much. But that was just one of my issues that I had regarding the police and regarding authority. Now, whoa, that scared me. My box of tools just fell over. Strange. Anyhow, the cops are watching me. So, what I wanted to talk for a minute here about is let's take the issue of why people are willing, because this is the main issue I want to cover here, is why people are willing to allow their rights to be trampled. And I'm going to say it's because people haven't had themselves an adverse experience regarding authority, the justice system, politicians, or laws that personally prevented them from doing something that they wanted to do. And now, of course, my experience has been my own, and the things that I've learned have been my own. But over the years, there's a resounding echo of these just injustices that are put upon the public. And I kind of wanted to start off by saying, a perfect example of why this is such an issue is because you don't hear about the white collar criminals going to prison, politicians, police, the corruption. It's very rare that anyone really goes to jail. If they're a CEO, if they have power, they can buy their way out of jail. And that's frustrating for a lot of people. But the name that came to mind when I thought of that was Bernie Madoff. And I remember somebody pointing something out one time and said the only reason Bernie Madoff went to jail is because he ripped off rich people. And that really made an impact. It was an absolute truth. They were lobbying to get his ass thrown in jail to make sure more rich people don't get abused. But if you're ripping off the poor as a banker or as a city who is fining people for having their lawns too long, or you have speed traps to pull over everybody that goes through your town going 1 mile and over the speed limit, giving them maximum fines just to get revenue for your town, there is a major problem. And this is what politicians are doing when they pass laws that benefit either their own companies or their lobbyists and generally don't favor the average person. And so many of the big decisions that are made in this country and around the world only benefit a very few. Yet people are under the illusion of freedom. Now, I'm not one of those people that says we have no rights. I realize that there are limits to all of our rights, even the freedom of speech, which I don't want to go into detail. People always bring up the fire in a crowded theater, that you can't say anything you want. And somebody followed that up with, well, you can scream fire if you follow it up with and brimstone. It's all about context. It's all about how you say something and what you mean and your intent. But these days, people's speech is being stifled more and more. And one could argue that it's for the better of society. We're just eliminating people who are haters or hateful thoughts. But we know that's not true. We know that getting wrapped up in that are people who are, say if you want to ban all talk about substance abuse or drugs, you're going to also ban all the people who are in recovery efforts who want to help others. And speaking of recovery, there are so many places where the whole town is focused on drugs and drug arrests. And these drug groups, these police forces, some of these people making well over $100,000 a year, and they have to justify their own value by doing raids on often people who did nothing. In fact, I watched one guy, this was from about a year ago, but he was filming the SWAT team across the street from his house raiding his neighbor's house. He just had his phone and he was standing in his doorway, like 100 feet away. As soon as they were done with the raid, 3 of the SWAT team came up, threw him to the ground, took his cell phone, threw him in jail for 5 days. And he's been in and out of litigation in court. And he's basically, they're using his past by saying, look, you have a record and you were, causing trouble on the scene or obstructing. Anything they want to throw at you, they can, just because they don't like you. And I know we've all heard these stories before, and a lot of people roll their eyes and say, oh, well, if you don't want to go to jail, don't cause trouble. Look, the right to speak, the right to document, the right to question our, not just police, but our authorities, our city officials, is a very important right. And people are being targeted left and right for talking about things. Like in their city council meetings, for example, they'll bring up a land use issue that the officials don't agree with because it might cut into their profits. So what do? They target the person. They go to their house and they seek out infractions. And yes, some of these infractions that people have are absolutely ludicrous. I mean, people don't realize having a barbecue in your front yard while you're holding a beer can be a crime, or at least a finable offense. And if these tickets eventually catch up, you can be arrested for these things. Parking in your own yard, having a garden in your front yard or too close to the curb. These little things, not having blinds or matching blinds in your house, or screen doors on your front and back door, harvesting your own rainwater, parking your bicycle in the yard, putting a basketball hoop up, having your bushes higher than 3 feet, and even walking on the wrong side of the crosswalk when you're crossing the street. Basically, anything that you can get harassed for, you will be harassed for if people are targeting you. And often people who speak up are targeted. And I mentioned that specifically because some of these small towns are so corrupt. There was one place, I don't know how large the town was. It's Pocomoke City, Maryland. And the police chief there, his name was Kevin Sewell, I believe. And he was trying to revamp the task force that basically they were raiding everybody and they were just constantly doing drug busts. And his idea was, let's get some of these people into treatment. Let's try to stop the busts and get help. And in the end, his own force turned against him. People had spoken up that had been arrested for drugs, and the police had tried to ask them if, hey, has the chief ever done anything wrong? They were trying to get him on prostitution or anything they possibly could, because they didn't want to eliminate their drug force, because they make so much money because of one important thing that a lot of people overlook, and that's civil forfeiture or asset forfeiture. If you get pulled over in a nice car and they think you're selling drugs, they can take your car. This means that police aren't necessarily targeting the person who's selling the most drugs. They're targeting the person who has the most money and resources, because often that money goes back into their department to fund their activities, you see. Now, this is being banished in many, many different places, but the thing is, cops have immunity and officials, have immunity, whereas the police or the people do not. And this makes it difficult for a citizen to justify their rights. Basically, if a cop says you did something, you did it. People still think that, the failure to identify is a reason for a cop to arrest you, or that you are forced to, show your ID whenever a cop wants. And we've all seen too many stories of police who want to abuse their power. But as I said, I'm not pointing out that all cops are corrupt. Like I said, the chief of police wanted to change the way things worked. That's the problem. People gang up against each other. And the idea that somebody just looks suspicious when they're walking down the road, all citizens should be speaking up on that. But it's hard, because if you live in a neighborhood and you have a suspicious person in your neighborhood walking around that looks like they might be doing something, you will call the cops too. Or you might go out and deal with it yourself, making the assumption the guy in the hoodie is causing problems. Believe me, I know. I had a guy knock at my door at like midnight asking for drugs. I made a video about it last year sometime. I mean, kid's lucky I didn't kick the crap out of him. But I did call the cops, and it wasn't because I was afraid he was going to harm somebody. It was because I was afraid he was going to get shot. He was obviously high and out of his mind, and I think of him, even though he was a creepy dude at my door, I consider him a citizen. He's young. He probably fucked up. Things happen. But your life can be ruined over something like this. Because if the cops, that's why I was wary, because I'm like, well, if the cops get to him first, it might help him, but it might hinder him too. It was a tough call. It was after I went to my neighbor's house asking for something too. It was a weird situation. But the point being here that policing for profit is, is just one of the issues with the police. But we need a police force. We need cops. I understand that. And so I don't really know how we can move forward with allowing others' rights to be violated and not caring. And it's important, I think, that all citizens care about what's going on with their neighbors and pay attention to these things. And so I'm going to get into that in part 2 because I'm running out of time on my camera here. So thanks for listening. Talk to y'all next time, and check out part 2.